Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, here on Depeche Mode, the podcast. It's that time of year again, devotees. June the 18th, 1988. 37 years of 101. Yeah, it needs to be talked about at least once a year. It marked such an important moment in the band's history. I've been enjoying leading up to the recording of today's podcast, listening to 101, the soundtrack from the film, and very much look forward to revisiting the movie either tonight or tomorrow night. May have to wait for this weekend, but usually 101 gets a rewatch a couple times a year, and certainly a rewatch right around June the 18th. Again, marking 37 years, going back to 1988, that I was at that famous Rose Bowl show. We also have your listener feedback to get to this week. No new news. We still don't have an official release date for the Depeche Mode film M, except that it'll be out sometime in the fall. I talked last week about the unreleased tracks in the end specifically. Hope you had the opportunity to check out the podcast version of the show if you're currently enjoying this up on YouTube, where I had a special addition to the end of that podcast. So if you missed it, be sure to go and download last week's show to give a listen to that. But those the track names for the other unreleased songs, potentially. We know Life 2.0, but we also have a Loose Cannon, and then, you got to forgive me, I forgot what the other one was. I don't have it in front of me. Needless to say, the Loose Cannon song title, that one has me really excited, by the way. I don't know why, but it's giving me a Barrel of a Gun vibes. I know it's just a title, and I have nothing to go off of. But there really isn't that harsher song on Memento Mori that you can point to. I'm thinking of tracks like Corrupt, Barrel of a Gun, A Pain That I'm Used to. Maybe Don't Say You Love Me kind of falls into that category. Perhaps My Cosmos Is Mine, but I don't know. It's been a while since we've had that more rockish, sinister-edged song, like Wrong is another good example. So I don't know. That title, Loose Cannon, has just stuck with me. So, listen, knowing my luck in terms of predictions, Loose Cannon, if that is indeed the song title, is going to end up being like a Martin Gore ballad or something. So, before we get into revisiting 101 and just a few thoughts that I have listening to the entirety of the concert today and getting to your listener feedback, scrolling through on Instagram, and one of the Depeche Mode accounts posted this clip that I'm fairly certain was from the Playing the Angels, Playing the Angel promotion. It could have been from Sounds of the Universe, but just given the age of the band members, and honestly, I grabbed the link and I didn't bother to look if it was in the notes of when the interview was done. But I was under the impression that Home was about something else. But according to this interview, Martin actually gives a bit of a backstory to why he wrote Home. So a quick clip, wanted to share it with you, and then we'll talk a little 101 here on the show.
Oh, what was that? God.
Let me do a bit of a setup here, because I've watched it a few times. So I believe that Martin was about to go and talk about Home, and Fletch kind of chimed in like he was going to give his version of it. So Martin hands the floor over to Fletch for him to give his thoughts on what he believes Home is actually about. So there's a bit of your setup.
Oh, what was that? God. I know what he's going to say. Do you? Please. Well, I always thought it was about home, going home, etc., etc. And then Martin said, it's not about that, it's about death. Is that true?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I was going through a very dark period at that time. And, you know, I just imagined that I was heading for an early grave. And kind of accepting that at that point.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Oh, you got a clap for that.
Now, these may cross over. And I don't know where I first heard this. I was always under the impression that, and maybe they're one and the same, but I was always under the impression that it was more specific than that, that what Martin was referring to in the song was actually referencing his drinking problems of the time, and that was his sort of ode to alcohol. That it was alcohol that was bringing him to this place. Now, maybe these are interchangeable ideas, meaning that he was dealing with an alcohol issue. The song was about that, but ultimately it was about him reconciling where his, I don't want to say alcoholism, because I don't know if Martin was truly an alcoholic. I've never heard that specifically. I just know that he had difficulties dealing with alcohol. And that perhaps that was what was leading him to his anxiety, and that his time was going to be limited, and that he could, you know, it was going to kill him. So I'd always heard it was specifically related to alcohol, and again, those two things may be interchangeable, but you know, it's rare. You and I both know that it's incredibly rare for Martin to ever get specific about the origin of his song lyrics. As a matter of fact, I've always appreciated that about the band, and it's one of the things about Precious that I almost wish, while it's pretty on the nose in the song lyrics, and if, you know, we all know the background of the band and the relationships that they've had and the relationships that worked and the ones that didn't. So based off the lyrical content of Precious, I think it's pretty obvious what Martin was referring to at the time, talking about his children, angels with silver wings. That being, you know, but I'd always kind of wished that he hadn't divulged that, or would continue to not give the origin of songs. I really love the ambiguity of Depeche Mode songs, wherein we as the fans can go and lay on top of it whatever relatable scenario we'd like. You know, especially at a young age, and I think that's what made the band so powerful at a young age, leading into what we'll talk about here with 101, where the band was really speaking to that generation. I know they were speaking to me. I know they spoke to you. I mean, this is why we've been lifelong fans. But they had tapped into something. Martin, at the time, had tapped into something deep within himself that he expressed through his songwriting that really resonated with us as fans, especially at that incredibly young and impressionable age where we're looking for guidance. We're looking for friendship. We're looking for meaning. And Depeche Mode gave that to so many of us in the way that it, you know, a way that the music and the lyrics spoke to us. So I think in years past, I've focused more on the documentary part of the movie 101. And this year, while I do plan on watching the film, I decided to not watch the movie prior to doing the podcast and instead go and listen to the soundtrack. Just basically listen to the concert, which is what I did today on the drive to and from work. Going to listen to it, I was a little reluctant because I remember how heavy they played up the crowd within the recording. It was done intentionally, but they really amplified the audience and the background and the crowd noise into the recording itself. The mix is done brilliantly. When you get into the actual tracks themselves, the crowd is still there in the mix, but it's not as prominent as it is between the tracks. I'm always struck, and I was when it was originally released, and just as impressed today as I was going back to, 1988, when the soundtrack came out, at just how great Dave's his vocals are. Just absolutely fantastic. You know, you listen to a lot of artists today, or even Dave, when you go and watch any of the original press appearances for the promotion of Memento Mori, when Dave's trying to belt out Ghosts again, and he's just not there yet, and he's off key. I recently watched the BBC session on YouTube, and specifically Walking in My Shoes, and you know, even then there's some wonkiness in the vocals, and there has been for Dave throughout the years. You know, thank goodness we have the ability to go and hear all of this, right? But you go back and listen to 101, and Dave's vocals are just absolutely spectacular. So I just made a couple of notes that I wanted to share with you this week, and then we'll get into the listener feedback. But first off, this being BV, meaning before Violator, so that was significant to me listening this time around, because we've spent so much time on the newer material here on the show, and certainly over the course of the past couple of years on Memento Mori, and so much time has passed since 101. You know, it's tough when you, not tough's not the right word, it's interesting when you go back and revisit the content and the live content here prior to Violator, prior to Songs of Faith and Devotion, and Ultra, and all of the many Depeche Mode staple songs now that are included in all the concerts that didn't even exist. And yet here you have this set list that's pretty spot on perfect. Like, I'm listening to the soundtrack, and at no point am I wanting any of those songs that didn't exist yet. Now, maybe that is kind of an unfair assessment, because I'm not watching a live show. I'm not watching a current iteration of Depeche Mode and going to see a live show, and then those songs aren't being played even though we knew they existed. So I think it's a bit of a cheat, but still, it encapsulates that moment in time so perfectly, prior to when, and just about when they were about to get launched into the stratosphere. I mean, 101 was the climbing up to the top of the ladder on the diving board before the band dives off into what would end up becoming, you know, the apex mountain of their career, Violator and the Songs of Faith and Devotion tour, Songs of Faith and Devotion, and the tours that would follow. So, but still, just absolutely pulling on that Depeche Mode nostalgia in listening to it. You know, even in the absence of all these amazing songs that came later, it is still at its core pure Depeche, even in the absence of other pure Depeche, if that makes any sense. Plus, when you get into, and I was thinking about this listening this morning, again, not watching the movie, but just sort of in my mind's eye, having watched 101 so many times, I can see all the scenes and Dave's performance and him yelling away from the mic and just dying to know what it is that he was yelling on stage in between those certain songs that are shown in the film. But when you think about the actual set design and how before they were transitioning into a much bigger production in terms of their live shows, the addition of Anton Corbijn's visuals and the films that he would create, you had a rather stark stage setup. Now, I think Anton did a really good job, especially on Songs of Faith and Devotion, to have this massive stage that Dave would play on, much in the same way the stage is for the Music for the Masses show. But, you know, apart from the lights, which obviously are archaic compared to what they are now, you actually have an individual there at the soundboard who's doing it by hand. I mean, it's incredible to watch. How much fun would that have been? But the light show is going to change every night because she's actually just doing it to the beat of the music. It's incredible. And then in terms of visuals, you have some of the banner changes in the back and some of the projection, and then the swirling lights in the fog, but nothing near what we end up getting on World Violation and, of course, on Songs of Faith and Devotion and all the tours that would follow after. And, my gosh, compare 101, the Music for the Masses show at the Rose Bowl, to the Memento Mori, stage. I mean, it's night and day. But it provides almost this post-punk vibe with the lack of the ancillary visuals at a time when the band was really, like I said, beginning to reach their apex mountain in terms of their songwriting and the crafting of the music. It's an interesting moment captured within all of what surrounds the content of 101 that makes it truly special. And I remember as a 15-year-old, the validation that I had of this band that I'd fallen in love with over the course of a handful of years, and thinking, there's a Depeche Mode movie. You know, as a few years off of being an adult, this thing that I loved was getting the superstar treatment. It's a movie. I mean, and as a kid, that's a big deal. I'm going to go to the movie theater and I'm going to watch my favorite band that my parents look at me cross-eyed whenever they hear me playing it or talking about it on the big screen in a movie theater where I'm going and seeing E.T. and Tron. I mean, oh my gosh, it's absolutely incredible. And the promotional work around 101 across the board is just great. I think we have a listener feedback this week talking about Anton Corbijn and there not being a fan. But that being said, the every aspect of the promotional material, the visuals that were done for 101, they're awesome. The poster image of Dave, that black and white shot, which I'm pretty sure was Anton, right? Am I wrong on this? Didn't he provide all the visuals for this? I mean, I know we had D.A. Pennebaker shooting the film, but this is when Anton was now in the mix. And there's that shot of Dave on stage with his hand up in the air with the smoke, black and white, you know, and he's got his back turned. I mean, just an iconic image. So many, it's absolutely Anton Corbijn. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the, mentally I'm going through the liner notes of the CD and the booklet, right? Yes, of course it's Anton's photographs. But just the iconic photographs surrounding it and the promotional work. I mean, the idea that we are going to use for the cover a photograph of the poster that's up for sale, I mean, it's genius. It may not look that way on paper, kind of like Anton Corbijn going and telling the band what the video for Enjoy the Silence would end up being. It doesn't look good on paper, but the finished work looks spectacular. And I know I've made reference to this before, but it's probably been a year, so I'll bring it up again. But when the singles started to be released for the promotion of the album, of the live album, and it had the big, huge, stark black cover with the large white Depeche Mode lettering, and yet it cut off. So you only get the DEP for like the LP of the single release of Everything Counts. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. We're talking 15 years old, right? 15, 16 at this point in time. But 15, 16 years old when this came out, and not being an art fan, Depeche Mode challenged me to appreciate that which wasn't as accessible. I mean, who cuts off the band name on the cover of an album? Well, Depeche Mode did. Those that were in charge of the visuals for the promotion, they did. And because it was this band that I loved, I kept an open mind about it. If it had been anybody else, well, that's stupid. Only half of the band's name is on the cover of this. My gosh, what happened to the rest of it? But this time around, I'm going, oh, it's Depeche. That's cool. Isn't that awesome? And like I said before, it really does capture the moment in the band's history when they were really going to take off. It's incredible that it's been 37 years. I mean, that's just unbelievable to me. A couple more notes on this, listening to it. The inclusion of Pleasure Little Treasure, as it was technically considered a B-side. I never thought I'd bring up Pleasure Little Treasure this much on the podcast, probably the third podcast in a row or more of talking about this song. And I know that it was considered more of an A-side in the U.S., but I just, listening to, again, the live album on the way home, it really stuck out. And Martin's distinct guitar work on the songs where he does play guitar, especially on Pleasure Little Treasure, it almost has a bit of a personal Jesus vibe to it. That bam. You know what I'm talking about. So good. Just absolutely phenomenal. Share your thoughts with me, if you don't mind. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. I'd love to next week on the show sort of reminisce a little bit more of what really sticks out to you about whether it's the live album, the artwork, whether it is the film itself, any aspect of it. I would really love to hear your thoughts and to talk about it on next week's episode. And with that, let's get to your listener feedback this week. First off, we hear from Easy Tiger UK, who says, "In the end, the new song sounds like a single to me. I love it. And to my mind, it would not look out of place on the Memento Mori album." No, I agree with you. And I've actually stopped listening to this leaked version, even though we have kind of a decent quality version for what it's worth. And there's already some remixes out there. But I've actually stopped kind of listening to it because I'm very much looking forward to hearing the song, and I don't want to become too accustomed to the version that was recorded at the Tribeca Film Festival. Somebody had made a comment, though, and I tend to agree, that there are some lyrical and even slight musical similarities to Ghosts Again, and that might have been why the song was kept off the album, where it was a bit of a retread. I love it for that. I think it's a fantastic song, and, you know, I agree with Easy Tiger here that it could have been a single, which, as I mentioned before, has me very excited for those other 3 tracks that we'll get later on this year. David Gahan-KS5JH writes this: "You have to note regarding Spirit in the Forest in the concert, it was shot during the very last 2 shows of the tour after 120 concerts, so Dave is obviously not going to sound fresh." I didn't have nearly as much of an issue with how Dave sounded in that concert. It was just more his vibe. I don't want to belabor the point. I've said it many times on the show, but he just had that sleazy vaudeville Elvis vibe going on that, again, he ditched for the Memento Mori tour that I just didn't care for. Probably one of my least favorite versions of Dave's live show presence. All right, let's go to Ron. Ron writes this. So, 2 episodes ago, I talked about the correlation between the album artwork and the music itself. Unfortunately, because I tend to do this, a little convoluted in what I was describing, trying to articulate what it was that I was going for in terms of, does the artwork affect the music? That's probably the easiest way to put it. Well, Ron got the assignment, and this is what he had to say. "The album and single art, to me, is indistinguishable from the music. This is the strongest with the release of the singles 86 through 98. During that period, I bought CDs religiously and spent time reading the booklets and sleeves, especially when I was younger and acquiring the back catalog. The album and single covers became a treasure hunt, where I investigated the shelves of every mainstream and otherwise music store searching for them." I agree with you. I was the same way. "I knew by heart every album cover, but the singles were a mystery and required more digging. I remember when I found the Policy of Truth CD maxi single. I had no clue what it was, but the artwork was familiar enough that it made me glance twice. The same thing happened with The World in My Eyes CD single. The artwork drew my attention, and I discovered it was DM after examining it. The singles and albums, the imagery, got so entwined with the music that I found myself using a Broken Frame artwork for my PC wallpaper and wearing a Construction Time Again t-shirt. Just the album cover photo, no identifying band info. In the end, the art invokes the same feelings in me as the music. That all said, recent albums from Sounds of the Universe onward came to me digitally, so the artwork meant a little less. I find myself going back to the 1980s and 90s classics to get my imagery fix." Thank you, Ron. If anything, you helped me to not feel so bad that I was too convoluted in my question. And I really feel the same way. It's a bummer. That's the easiest way to put it. I know times change. I know the industry changes, but the artwork of the band was just so important getting our hands on it. And I know we can still buy the physical releases, but it's a bummer to me that we, didn't end up getting more exclusive artwork, especially for Memento Mori. There's so much that could have been done with the visuals, but I also understand that things change, and I'm just incredibly thankful that we still have unheard Depeche Mode music that's been created out there waiting for our ear holes. All right, Glenn in 1965 writes this. Hey, John, exciting week for us all, but specifically responding regarding the artwork question. So Glenn got the assignment too. Not a fan of Anton's album art at all, really. Certainly, I completely separate the music from the art. The Violator Rose is simply something synonymous with them now, as the skulls are with Memento Mori. Association rather than art for me. But I do like his portraits of the band. In particular, those in Prague in the mid-1980s, and most recently the one with the shadow for Fletch included. Inspired that image is. If every disc was in a black sleeve embossed with DM, I would still be as excited as ever to hear the music. For the concerts, however, the sets and the video content are key. Did anyone else get chills when 2023 or 4 Dave stood in front of the video of 1987 Dave singing You're Behind the Wheel in parallel? Sometimes the images enhance the music, but the music stands on its own regardless. Thank you for that, Glenn. I appreciate it. All right, next up, Lars Guthel writes this. Really incredible that there's a brand new song by DM playing in the movie theater, and plenty of people keep chatting with each other instead of listening. Right? I'm so glad I wasn't there. I'll have to ask. We're going to get Rob on the show. My schedule's been so wonky that I couldn't. There's just no way I could pin down like a specific time to get Rob on, which is why I haven't. Rob Rom from the Global Depeche fan group. But I need to ask him, how quickly did he realize that song was a brand new song, and how annoyed was he that people were talking in the audience when it was playing? And I thought that there were multiple screenings at the Tribeca Film Festival, not that one. And I fully expected that we would have gotten a much cleaner version of In the End than the ones that people have been able to sort of craft together based off of those initial recordings. But apparently I was wrong. I could have sworn that I saw at least 4 different screenings for the film that weekend of the festival. But apparently I was inaccurate. All right, let's go and hear from friend of the show, Jason, who writes this. Despite the quality of the song uploaded, wow, what a song. It instantly feels familiar and sounds like the best of the 80s. And as soon as Martin's vocals kick in, I quite literally get chills every time. I do too, and I think that's really one of the great moments of the song is when Martin comes in after Dave's vocals. I'm now very annoyed with the band for keeping this gem from us for so long. I was surprised, though, by the reaction of the audience. As soon as the song came on, I would have expected the theater to fall silent with the occasional whoop of excitement. Instead, it came across as if many didn't realize or couldn't be bothered, unless the recording online made the chatter of the audience sound worse than it was. I do appreciate the efforts of the fan who tried to shush the audience. That made me laugh. At the time of writing this Saturday evening, I had hoped that fans going to the second screening were better prepared and would get a better quality recording online. Yes, there was another screening. I was right. After catching a very short clip of World in My Eyes from the movie, and from what I've read of some reviews, it sounds as if there's some experimentation going on with the visuals. If Rob is on the show, I would appreciate it if you would ask him if we're going to get something more akin to the live release of Touring the Angel, or if this experimentation was limited to World in My Eyes and playing tribute to Fletch. My understanding from what I've seen of the film so far, and from the reviews, is that I think that moment that you're talking about in World in My Eyes is specific to Fletch in general. I do get a vibe that this is sort of an interesting combination of what was done with Touring the Angel in the way that they really manipulated throughout that concert. the visuals of the concert itself, which I can take if I'm in the mood for it. Sometimes if I want some more video quality, obscure live footage to watch, I'll go and watch Touring the Angel, where I typically prefer more of a straightforward shot performance. Or if you're going to deviate at all, it would have been Anton's deviation a bit, even though it's pretty straightforward, in Devotional. And finally, after learning more about the movie, I wonder if the issues reported for delaying its release was to do with the use of poems rather than song rights in the DM catalog. Interesting. Exciting times ahead. With good wishes, Jason. Thank you very much, Jason. Always great to hear from you. Next up. Glenn 1965 actually wrote in twice. Usually I combine when there's multiple comments, so let me go back to him just briefly. He wrote, great to see Martin and Dave together again. Imagine the surprise being there, watching the main event, and then realizing that you're hearing a new track, and the frustration of others not being quiet around you as you listen. Sounds promising, exciting to hear all 4 songs in their glory soon. And lastly, we hear from Chris Culpepper, who writes this. I recently converted my friend Matt into a DM devotee. Nice. I bought him the entire catalog. Wow, you're a good friend. And it's interesting to hear his perspective as a new fan. He's not biased like myself, seeing the catalog as pre-Allen, post-Allen, etc. Matt noted that Music for the Masses should have been an EP, although he liked the record. He said there seemed to be a lot of filler. Agent Orange, Nothing. How dare you call Nothing filler? Pimp. Pleasure Little Treasure, To Have and to Hold. Oh, gosh. His words, not mine. Oh, Matt. I already know you're typing. So, real quick, just to, so my buddy Matt, right? I mentioned him on the show a lot. Let me guess here what he's going to... So I don't think Matt is going to take much issue with Agent Orange or Pimp, but he's definitely going to take issue with calling To Have and to Hold, Pleasure Little Treasure, and especially Nothing as filler. I mean, I have issue with that, but he asked if DM perhaps felt rushed to capitalize on the success of Black Celebration, causing Music for the Masses to be lacking in quality tracks. Interesting. You know, I'm not going to dismiss that question outright. I get what he's saying. The strong songs, listen, those are all great tracks. I love To Have and to Hold, Pleasure, Little Treasure, and Nothing. Make no mistake. And certainly at the time, I didn't feel that way. But at the same time, there's also bias going on because you're such a big fan of the band. You have such an open mind. You do like what you like. And if the songs weren't any good at all, that bias is only going to get you so far. I've had bias listening to albums on a first blush that I thought were up there with Violator. As a matter of fact, when I was doing my Memento Mori review, when I got the advanced copy of the album, I remembered that there were fans on the Depeche Mode home forum that had gone back to my comments that I'd made in the past, and specifically comments that I made after the first hearing of Spirit, where I said it was the best album that they'd done since Violator. That was bias at the time. I was blinded by what I was hearing, especially, and more specifically, the electronic sounds and the production of the album is what really drew me to it, but after spending time with it, it nowhere near reaches the levels of Violator, and I have completely changed my... I mean, I enjoy the album. It's not one of my favorites, but certainly changed my tune. Whereas Memento Mori now, with a couple of years on the album, and I can't believe it's been out that long, still is up there with me, going back to Songs of Faith and Devotion and Ultra. So those songs I still absolutely love on Music for the Masses, but I can imagine as being a new fan, you might feel differently. So thanks for that, Chris Culpepper. That was a nice email too. Everybody who wrote in this week, thank you very much. And if you'd like to go and comment again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Listen, that wraps the show up for this week. If you are a new listener to the show, I hope you'll support what I do weekly, talking about the greatest band on the planet. Specifically, if you enjoy reading or listening to science fiction. I'm a massive science fiction fan, and I wrote a 7-book science fiction series called EMBARK. set in the future where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture, and inspired in part by Depeche Mode, life in the so-called space age, the world we live in, and life in general. Depeche Mode is actually embedded within the story as the lead character. Taft is a massive Depeche Mode fan at a time in the story set in 2172, where the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story, and it features references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect, along with all the music, alternative music from the 80s into the 90s, all while telling, most importantly, an exciting science fiction adventure story without an agenda. As Earth faces its end, follow pilots Taft, Catha, and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future. It's available on Amazon.com, so do not miss this fun, fast-paced, and action-packed science fiction adventure. Ebook, Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Just head on over to Amazon.com and search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. As always, I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. I look forward to hearing from you between now and next week. God bless, and I'll talk to you then.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening.
Depeche Mode, the